This is CNN Breaking News.
All right, let's get to it. This is CNN. I'm Brooke Baldwin. We start hour 2 here with more breaking news. A bigger role for the United States in the war against the most brutal terrorists on earth. This is a major reversal in policy. We'll now see U.S. boots on the ground inside of Syria for the very first time. To be precise here, U.S. Special Operations Forces. Those are the ones who will be heading to Kurdish-controlled territory in northern Syria to help the rebels as they battle ISIS. But the specific mission of these U.S. troops is at this stage murky at best. We just heard a fire exchange between the White House press secretary Josh Earnest and our own White House correspondent Jim Acosta about whether this constitutes a combat mission.
There's a question that the American people have, which is this president, this White House, the officials here at this White House repeatedly, over and over again, made it clear to the American people that there would be no combat role for U.S. troops fighting ISIS. That appears to be changing. Not only is there this announcement that you're talking about today, which you say they won't be involved in a combat role, but you're not ruling out the possibility that they may be involved in some sort of combat operation. But on the Iraq side, you have Pentagon officials this week saying we're in combat. So it would be great if we could just have a moment of clarity here and you could acknowledge that yes, this mission is changing. It is not what it was said it was going to be at the onset of this. Yeah. I mean, I just think it's clear.
To say that, Jim, would only confuse the situation. The fact of the matter is the mission that the Commander-in-Chief has given our military personnel in Iraq and now in Syria is a train, advise, and assist mission. And we have gone to great lengths to make clear that that is in no way diminishes the amount of risk that our men and women in uniform will be facing. We've also been quite clear that there actually have been situations where combat boots have been on the ground inside of Syria. We've been quite candid about that. The president ordered a mission involving U.S. military personnel putting boots on the ground inside of Syria to try to rescue American hostages that had been taken by ISIL. That occurred more than a year ago.
That happened just a little bit ago here. And also, to be clear, the rebels these American troops will be helping are the same people who will now not only be fighting ISIS terrorists, but also fighting Syria's regime forces and their ally, the heavily armed Russians. All of this, a major turnaround from the assurances we have heard thus far from President Barack Obama, really ever since 2013.
I do not foresee a scenario in which boots on the ground in Syria, American boots on the ground in Syria, would not only be good for America, but also would be good for Syria.
I will not put American boots on the ground in Syria. I will not pursue an open-ended action like Iraq or Afghanistan.
With respect to the situation on the ground in Syria, we will not be placing U.S. ground troops to try to control the areas that are part of the conflict inside of Syria.
The resolution we've submitted today does not call for the deployment of U.S. ground combat forces to Iraq or Syria.
Joining me now are CNN senior international correspondents, both Clarissa Ward and Nick Payton-Walsh. So, Nick, let me just go to you first. Who exactly is going? Where will they be going in Syria? What kind of environment will these American special forces be walking into?
Under 50 special forces, we understand, in that advise and assist mission, but it will most likely be around the area, we think around Kobani. That's most likely that city fought over and cleared out of ISIS late last year, because I think much of the prong of this first part of the mission is aiming towards the ISIS stronghold of Raqqa. Now, that's where there are some Syrian Arab coalition forces, along with a lot of Kurds as well, who are doing the majority of fighting there. Who are they going to assist? Well, I have to say that is still a little bit fuzzy here. Yes, they say this Syrian Arab coalition. Now, we do know there are a number of comparatively moderate groups who make that up, but they're not particularly big and they're not particularly powerful, and they're not really that often in the fight too. So there will be a lot, I imagine, of extra equipment and backing up with aircraft, airstrikes for these moderates if the special forces get traction with them and be able to work this out properly. But that doesn't translate into a sudden force overnight. Much of the fighting probably will still be done by the Kurds. That's complicated for America's key ally, the Turkish, who are very suspicious of the Kurds. And it isn't exactly what America's always been wanting to do here, which is create a moderate Syrian Sunni force in northern Syria to take on ISIS and then see what happens where they decide to move on and fight the regime later on, leaving that question perhaps to the distant future, Brooke.
So you perfectly laid out what's at play here for these Americans. Clarissa, to you, I know you were just in Syria. You were embedded for multiple days. Not only did you talk to the fighters, you actually spoke with ISIS militants. And they told you, correct me, but they told you essentially U.S. troops, bring it on. They want Americans on the ground. Why?
Well, Brooke, it's a conversation I've been having with various ISIS militants who I speak to for a while now, and it's always struck me as quite curious that they've said they would welcome U.S. troops on the ground. I think, first of all, you have to see this as bluster and bravado above anything else and propaganda. But beyond that, I do think they have a sense that a visible presence of U.S. troops on the ground in Syria would be very polarizing. And perhaps they're hoping that they can capitalize on that, that perhaps it'll push some other Islamist groups that have up until this point been fighting against ISIS into the arms of ISIS. But at this stage, we're not really talking about a visible presence on the ground. We're talking about a few dozen advisors who will be training, who will be assisting. And what's interesting on that front, Brooke, is that the fighters we spent time with on the ground told us that what they really need in order to push into ISIS strongholds like Raqqa is more weaponry, heavier weaponry, armor-piercing weapons, and there's still a big question mark as to whether this enhanced U.S. role will also come in the form of heavier U.S. weapons.
Clarissa Ward, thank you so much. You would know, having been over there, understanding the questions they're asking. Nick Payton-Walsh, thank you so much as well. Christopher Hill, let me bring you in, former U.S. ambassador to Iraq and dean at the University of Denver, also the author of Outpost, A Diplomat at Work. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for coming back. Welcome back.
Pleasure.
You just heard my conversation. You know the news. Your reaction to this?
Well, first of all, it's obviously a very big step, especially in light of the clips that you had having our president saying he won't put boots on the ground, because these are boots on the ground. Now, without parsing it too much, I would say the difference in numbers is a difference in substance. I mean, we're talking only about 50 people. These are not battle formations, so it's not quite the same as sending several units in there. And I think the president is being very clear that the United States will not be doing the fighting. That said, I think these U.S. individuals, if I can say, can be very helpful in terms of helping to shape the battlefield, and perhaps in a moment where we think it might be ripe to start pushing ISIS back again. So I don't think it's bad strategy. The problem is that I think the president's going to have to explain how he said he'll never do this, and now he's doing this. And as for what's going on the ground, I would encourage people to understand that what's going on in Syria is, on the one hand, a battle with ISIS, but it really hasn't been a Damascus versus ISIS. Damascus has its hands full with various other Sunni militia groups in the other parts of Syria. What this is a sort of battle out in the desert involving Kurds, involving some Sunni Arabs to be sure, but especially involving ISIS. So far, this is not part and parcel of what we've come to understand as a Syrian sectarian civil war. And I think the big news in that regard, of course, is what has been going on in Vienna.
I wanted to hear you out there. Let me go back to your first point, Mr. Ambassador, because I had on not only a Lieutenant Colonel but also a Navy SEAL, both of whom have said, yes, this is, advise and assist, but this is, I don't want to parse this too much either, but this is a combat role. I mean, we saw what happened, for example, in northern Iraq with rescuing the hostages. We heard from the SecDef essentially saying it was an advise and assist. Firefight happened. They breached the compound and got involved. Those were combat, that was suddenly a combat role. So this would be combat. I just want to hear that from you.
I certainly agree with that. The point being that if you're going to be successfully advise and successfully assist, you essentially have to go along with these indigenous forces on the ground. So I don't think it's really a proposition where we can stay back and they come back after a day and we say, how did it go? So I think you're absolutely right. Americans will very much be in harm's way.
If we're just talking several dozen, and I know these are the mightiest of the mighty, these Americans who will be sending over, but we know, as we just heard from Clarissa, as we've heard from Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, Raqqa is one of the goals. The 3 R's from the other day, Raqqa, Ramadi raids. With Raqqa, if you have several dozen advisors and Kurds, I mean, can you really take this ISIS stronghold?
Well, I think they don't have what they need to take it at this point, but I suspect that part of the mission of the U.S. Operators will be to try to encourage much better cooperation between the Kurds and the Sunni Arabs in place. So I think you might see a real effort to try to get these forces, because there are a lot of indigenous forces there, get them to work together, get them to plan together, and get them to attack ISIS together. So I think the idea is that by having these 50 Americans, they will be kind of a force multiplier with respect to the indigenous forces. Look, it's high-risk business, but we really cannot see what is going on the ground by being in the air. We have to have some people on the ground, and so I think that's the inspiration behind it.
All right, Ambassador Chris Hill, thank you. Thank you so much. Coming up next here, breaking in the world of politics. More on our breaking news here. U.S. Special Forces may soon be on the ground in Syria. This is a major escalation in the U.S.-led fight against ISIS. President Barack Obama has long resisted this step. The president has insisted for years and years, over and over again, that he will not put American boots on the ground in Syria. But here is what we now know. Close to 50 special ops will be sent to Kurdish-controlled territory. This is in northern Syria to help moderate rebels battling ISIS. U.S. troops sent to Syria are not expected to serve on the front lines. They're entering as you well know, a very hot combat zone and can engage the enemy if they come under fire. So joining me now, former Navy SEAL Chad Williams. He's been involved in similar advise and assist missions with Iraqi security forces. He is also the author of Seal of God. Chad, here we are. 1 week later, we were chatting a week ago today, and we were talking about the possibility of this happening, a possible shift in strategy. It's official today. Your response?
I think that it's a great call. You know, the head of our enemy, the snake, the snake of the head, it's in Syria. And so we need to go over there and put a foot to that head. And I guarantee you, none of our guys in the special operations community are walking around with their tail between their legs. They're very hungry to get over there. I'm sure they're saying, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" There's 1,000 other special operators that are just hoping that the chains will be cut and they could be sent over there to help advise and assist and put a heel to the head of that snake in Syria. All
right. So our special forces, they're mighty men, they're ready to roll over there. Let me ask you about the language here. And I know there was a back and forth even at the White House press briefing between our correspondent Jim Acosta and the spokesperson, the notion of advise and assist versus combat. To you, is there a difference?
It is a combat role, but it's not going to be American forces on the very front in the spotlight. We're going to be working a little bit more in the shadows. We're there in case these guys get into a situation where we need a little bit of backup. We're there to assist them. That's the assistance part of these advise and assist operations. But primarily, it's going to be led by these resistance fighters, and we're there just to support them, advise them, and teach them how to take the fight to the enemy against a very fierce enemy. I mean, ISIS is evil. Let's not forget the beheadings, the burning of the Jordanian pilot, and so many others, burying these children. So our mighty men of valor are going over there for a righteous cause.
How mighty are the Kurds who we will be partnering with to defeat ISIS? What do you know about them? Because I've heard described different ways.
Well, I've worked with them before. These are the kinds of guys that will not back down. And so I'm glad that we have them. They're not the types that will abandon their post. And so I'm happy. These guys are hungry and thirsty. They're good sled dogs. They're there to give their master a good run as well.
I was talking to a Green Beret earlier in the week, and he said to me, Brooke, obviously we need to go in, boots on the ground, but we need to leave a light footprint. The last thing the United States needs to do is get entangled, overcommitted into what he called already a quagmire. How do we pull that off?
Well, that's what the special operations community is all about. We're all about being strategic, surgical, and crippling the enemy, going after particular high-value individuals and taking out strongholds. So that's definitely our area of expertise. This isn't going to be a large ground force. We're going to take them out in very particular ways.
How? Without divulging all of what you know. How? I mean, what will these missions look like?
Yeah, without getting into, op security, taking some of these guys that are high-value individuals, and you want to go for the head of the snake, like I said. And so that's there in Syria. And so if we could cut the snake's head off, we'll definitely be crippling the enemy, going after these high-value individuals and taking out some of their strongholds.
Chad Williams, thank you so much. And thanks again for your service, as always, to this country. Appreciate it. Coming up next, we have...
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.